101. What would that look like? Well, I'm here today to do my best to explain that. This will not be any sort of advanced video. This is super basic, but I know I've promised this for quite some time, and I'm finally here to share all my tips, tricks, and secrets about learning to do sourdough. Usually I like to keep my videos moving pretty quickly, get right into it, not have too long of an introduction, but I thought for this video it would be helpful to share a little bit of backstory and some things on sourdough starters. So I will do a little bit of talking at the beginning here, and if you are only here for the actual recipe, I will have everything timestamped below so that you can hop around to whatever you're looking for today. I am in love with sourdough, and actually have been for quite some time, long before it became trendy in, what was it, 2019, 2020? I was introduced to it back when I had Lyme, and that was one of the very few foods that I could still eat because of the fermentation process. And so I fell in love with it then, and honestly I've been doing sourdough 8-9 years. So that is super exciting. I love it. Can definitely testify that after a while it just becomes like second nature to you. But there's actually two kinds of sourdough starters, and a lot of people are only familiar with the one kind. It is the typical flour and water sourdough starter that gets all bubbly and beautiful like that, and that's the one that I definitely see most people use nowadays. But there's actually another one. I know it's not very aesthetic in this. It's a lot more watery, but actually, in my opinion, a lot easier than the other one. And this one is made of instant potato flakes, water, and sugar. And both of these are sourdough starters. I kind of doubted myself for a little bit after doing sourdough for years, using this potato flake one. And then when sourdough became trendy with the other one, I was like, wait, am I even doing the legit thing? But I looked it up and it is the legit thing, but they do perform differently as starters, and they also taste quite different. So I'm gonna just quickly break that down a little bit. With these two starters, they are very different, and in order to try to be as concise as I can, I'm gonna talk about them one at a time. First up being the one that I was introduced to first when I started doing sourdough, and that is the one with the instant potato flakes. This, in my opinion, is a completely no-fail method of doing sourdough. And also, if you have someone, husband, kids, or even maybe yourself, who does not care for the sourdough taste, this one is really good because you can totally fool someone into thinking they're eating normal white bread when actually it's sourdough. This gives the fluffiest, lightest sandwich loaves ever. It does not have that super crusty exterior, so it's just honestly like my favorite bread recipe ever. And I've gotten so many rave reviews serving this to company or even gifting it to neighbors and stuff. Everybody loves the one that this one gives because it feels more like just a really good homemade loaf of bread without that sour taste. Now, this one does need to sit in the fridge all the time unless you are actually feeding it and using it. I would not let this one sit on the counter a week at a time or anything like that. You do want to keep it in the fridge. I'll pull it out in the morning when I want to use it. I'll get another container, and by the way, for all sourdough, this one and the other one, don't use any metal. They need to be in plastic or glass. I use wooden utensils when I'm touching the starter because metal will actually kill the starter. So I'll get another container and mix 1 cup of warm water, 3/4 cups sugar, and 3 tablespoons instant mashed potato flakes in that bowl. Just give it a little stir so that it's incorporated, and then pour it into here, stir it together a little bit, and then I'll pop my lid on. You don't have to have a plastic container like this. It just works well for me. You can totally keep this in a jar and cover it with like cheesecloth or something like that. What's interesting to me with this one is it does not rise, you know, 2-3 times the size like the other one. But a way that you can tell that this is a super happy starter is the lid actually pops off partway through the day. It'll get a little like foamy on the top. I will let this sit on the counter at room temperature all day long. We'll mix the dough in the evening, and then you do need to wait 3 days before you feed it again. So again, that's a little bit different than the other one. And I know it's a big thing that you should discard starter. I do not discard starter. I just will use whatever I want, put the rest back in the fridge. Obviously, if you end up with too big of an amount, That's up to you. You can throw some out, give it to a friend, whatever. And then once I have my dough mixed, I'll pop the lid back on, put it in the fridge, and it's good anytime after 3 days. I usually try to feed it once a week, but have definitely gone longer and it's been completely fine. So this is definitely my favorite, like no fail, super easy, super yummy, kid-friendly sandwich bread starter. And then let's talk about the other one. So this one is your typical, what people usually think of when they think of sourdough starter. It's got all the bubbles in it. It looks super bouncy and it is a lot of fun. But to me, this one is a little bit more of a creativity thing. It's super fun. It does make amazing pancakes, dinner rolls, all those things. In this video, I'm just gonna include a basic bread recipe for both this one and the other one. I do use different recipes between the two of them. I'm excited to, from here on out, share more like all these other sourdough recipes that we love and use so consistently. But I thought it would be better to do those in a separate video so that this could be more of just like a super basic beginner level video that I could refer people back to when I start doing a little bit more advanced stuff. So anyhow, this one is really fun, but it did take me a while to figure out. In my opinion, this one is definitely a little bit more nitpicky, but not impossible. I would just suggest, if possible, get your starter either from a friend or you can order them online. But I originally tried making my own starter, and for one, it's super time consuming, and if you haven't done sourdough before, it can just be kind of tricky to know, like, is it doing what it should be doing? Like, are these the right signs? Should it be rising more? It can just be a little picky. So especially if you're starting out, I would recommend getting some discard from a friend as starter, or you can even order them on Etsy. I was actually looking on there for a while, and they have some pretty cool starters, I will say, like couple 100-year-old Greek whatever starters, all these different ones, and they're pretty inexpensive on there. So if you don't know anybody, or you could even check like Facebook groups in your area, there's more than likely someone there that would be happy to share. This one likes to rise about 4 to 6 hours, so I will not feed this one in the morning. I actually like to feed this one in the afternoon around 3 or 4 o'clock, and then let it rise until evening, and again mix my actual dough in the evening so that it can rise overnight, and then in the morning is when we bake both of these kinds of bread. I normally feed this one, for this amount, I would probably give it like 1 cup flour, 1 cup water. One thing to note is I did not have a really happy starter until I started using filtered water, which I think depends where you live. We have well water, just right here on the farm we have our own well. It's supposed to be pretty good, but it did make a difference when I started using the fridge, like the actual filtered water. And then also the flour. I knew you wanted to use unbleached flour, but I tried the Snavely's flour for a number of times and never had success until I switched my flour to this one, which is Hecker's Unbleached Forever. And I've seen people use other flours. I don't think it has to be this specific one, but make sure that it's unbleached. And if you are having trouble with whatever flour you're using, I would try using filtered water. I would also try another unbleached flour. I know a lot of people actually like unbleached organic. I don't use organic since it's fermented anyway. That's the flour that I use. I would do 1 cup flour, about 1 cup water. If it starts getting a little runny, I would do a little bit less water. If it starts being too stiff, add a little bit more. It should be like a pancake batter when you're done, and then you just also set it on the counter with a cheesecloth, or I actually often use a napkin with, this is actually very DIY. This is actually like a wrecked headband that the flour came off, and that's what I use to hold it in place. So this is not the jar that I actually normally have it in. I need to wash it because it was getting kind of goopy on the ends. So probably when you see me mixing it this evening, I'll have transferred it into another jar when I go feed it. Let this one sit out as well for 4 to 6 hours, and then this one is easy to tell when it's ready because of how much it rises and bubbles. And while the other one has the very family-friendly, typical sandwich loaf feel, this one is really fun because you get the beautiful big air pockets in your loaves. You can do the artesian loaves, which is so fun. I love them both for different reasons. Honestly, both are not hard once you get the drift. The procedure, the process of how you use them is very, very similar. So I hope I'm making sense. I feel like I'm just blabbing off. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. I'm not the know-it-all of sourdough bread, but I have been doing it for almost a decade now. I definitely had a lot of trial and error through it and learning at least what works for me. Sourdough can be a little bit tricky when you're starting because you feel like I need to follow this exact recipe. And it's frustrating when people say it varies on where you live or what time of the year it is. And while it's frustrating, it's true that it is very dependent on the weather, especially like how warm it is in your house, in your kitchen, wherever you're letting it rise, because it will rise a lot faster when it's warm than if it's like a really cold kitchen. And so that's something to keep in mind. I think altitude can also play into it somewhat, but the encouraging thing is that all these people are still doing sourdough in all these different states and countries and around the world and still having success. So I think one thing to just remember as you get into it, yes, you'll probably flop some loaves. I sure did, but just keep playing around with it. If you know of someone in your area who does sourdough, it can be super helpful. Just see it as a work of art that you get better and better each time that you work on it and that you play around with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and feed the potato flake starter now. And then this afternoon, we'll be back to feed the flour and water starter. And then we'll see you again this evening when it's time to mix up the loaves. Now, while I have good light, because I know this evening we'll probably have terrible lighting, which is one of my pet peeves. I hate filming when the lighting's bad, but it is what it is. A couple things you should have on hand is obviously something non-metal to be feeding your starter. A book that has been super helpful for me in my sourdough journey is this one. It's the Artesian Sourdough Made Simple. This one did such a good job of going through just step by step the process of making your own starter and then also just of making your own first loaf. It has a bunch more recipes. I would say these are all fairly simple recipes, but some of these are my favorite like basic recipes to play off of and make my own twists of and all that. Really, really good and helpful. Then you will also want to have a bench scraper, and this will just make it super easy to scoop up your loaf because it is a very soft dough. And then a food scale. Yes, I was like, I don't need a food scale. Like I've always measured with a measuring cup with this starter, and it's true, I didn't need any of this stuff for this starter. But when I got to the other one, I was not having success until I got a food scale. And since then, I've actually started using a scale more because it's crazy how, for one, like one of my measuring cups actually fits inside of another measuring cup that's supposedly the same size. And you just realize that if you just go by measure without weighing, it's not as accurate. So for this kind of sourdough, I would definitely recommend using a food scale. You can get them super inexpensive off of Amazon. And then if you want to do the artesian loaf, you will also need a Dutch oven and a lathe. We'll look at that later. So let's feed the potato flake starter and then we'll be ready to mix these tonight. It is almost 10 o'clock in the evening now actually, and we have two happy little starters here. This is the flour and water one. You can see lots of little bubbles in there. It is ready to use, and then the other one, you can see how the lid popped up here, and then it has this layer of foam bubbles here, and both are ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix the doughs now. I'll have the recipes in the description box below, but also I'll just kind of try to show you here what I'm doing, and then we'll cover them and let them rise. I'm gonna actually start with the flour and water one because that one does need to rest for half an hour, and then you fold it again, and I'll show that to you. The other one, you simply mix and cover, and it's good till morning. So let's start with the flour and water starter. All right, so I have my little scale here. I just put a container on and then made the scale go to 0 again. We have some measuring spoons and my bowl. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by putting 500 grams of flour in here. Okay, we're at 500 grams, so I'll go ahead and dump this into the bowl. Then we'll add 350 grams of warm water. And add that to the flour. And then I'll take my starter here and we'll add 50 grams of sourdough starter. This is the fun part. I love playing with starter when it's this fluffy and bubbly. It's so fun. Okay, went a little bit over again, so I'm just taking a little bit out. And then we'll add that to our mix here. All right, and then I'll take 2 teaspoons of salt, as well as 2 tablespoons of oil. And I like to use avocado oil in my breads. Looks like I should have used a little bit of a bigger bowl, but I'm just gonna go ahead and stir this all together now, and then we'll let it rest for half an hour. Okay, so this is what the dough looks like. It's kind of just a shaggy blob of Abby's playing the piano over here. So what I'm gonna do is actually take a damp towel. I just put it under the faucet and then wring it out good. We're gonna cover this and let it sit on the counter for 30 minutes, and then we'll fold it over. So in the meantime, we're gonna move on to our other starter and get that dough all mixed up. So for this one, I'm gonna add about 4.5 to 5 cups of flour, 1.5 cups of warm water, and then a 1/2 cup of oil. Again, I like to use avocado oil. And then we're gonna take our nice bubbly starter here and just give it a little stir. It's still not gonna be completely dissolved. That's fine, that's how this one acts. But we'll put 1 cup of the starter in this dough. And then about a tablespoon of salt. And we'll mix that all together. I'm just gonna knead it just a little bit with my hands to finish fully incorporating the flour. All right, so it's starting to come together pretty nice. I'm just gonna turn it over, and then we'll also cover this one with a wet towel. The kids are sleeping, so I need to be quiet, but we have one more step to do before we can call it quits for the night. So I have the flour and starter bread dough here, and I just need to stretch and fold it, and then we can tuck it in for the night. the next morning now, and we have our doughs ready to go. They both have risen some. So I'm just gonna actually take this one out. This is the flour and water starter. We are just gonna fold it over into the center. So the way that I do that is just take one side and pull it in. And this basically will just shape your loaf for you and make it nice and round. And then I'll just take my bench scraper and put it on a little bit of a floured surface, and then we'll just let it sit here for about 5 to 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'm gonna take potato flake dough and we're gonna punch this down and put it directly into loaf pans. All right, so I'll just divide this in 2 pieces, trying to make them somewhat equal. And then I just take my dough and just folding it back into itself in the bottom and kind of forming a nice round top. I don't have cooking spray on hand right now, so I'm actually just gonna take a napkin and dip it in some oil to grease my loaf pans. I would definitely grease the pans though, or else your bread will stick to the pan. So we'll grease these, and then this one, there is no 5 to 10 minute wait. You just put it directly into the pans. And I'll do the same thing with my other half here with the dough. I'm just folding it back into itself, and then once it looks pretty nice and smooth on the top, I'll pop it into the pan. And then I'll just grab a fork, poke some holes in here. This just helps it to release air as it bakes and keeps it from making these big holes and caves throughout the bread. And then we'll just let it sit. I often like to find a sunny spot to set it in because it rises better. It likes the warmth, so I would find the warmest place in your house. The rise will depend on how warm it is, but I usually let mine sit anywhere between 4 and 6 hours. Okay, it's been 5 to 10 minutes, so I'm gonna grab my other starter now. I just lined this bowl that I had the dough in with parchment paper. If you have an actual sourdough proofing basket, of course that will work great. You can also put a towel in here. Just make sure you dust it really well. I even like to spray mine with cooking spray and then flour it because the dough tends to want to stick to the fabric. So that's why I'm using parchment paper here today. This is my favorite part probably of, well, my second favorite part of doing this kind of sourdough, and that is pulling it towards you. So basically what this does is just makes it a nice round loaf, and it also aids in it later bubbling up. Sorry about all the noise. My kids are just in the other room. It also will help it to rise a lot better. It kind of like traps the air in it as you pull it front. So what I'm gonna do is just cup my hands around the dough, and I'll show it to you a little closer up. And pull it towards me, and it just kind of makes it a nice tight round loaf. And then we're gonna grab our bench scraper, scoop it up from the bottom, and flip it upside down into this bowl. So let's get her done. So I picked it up like this, and then I'll rotate it so that I get the other side, because you want to do this to all the sides. A little too much flour on here. There we go, that's better. After doing that a few times, you can see we have a nice, really round, puffy little piece of dough here. So we're gonna go ahead and put that into the parchment paper bowl now and cover it. Okay, and then I'm just gonna cover this with the same towel I used last night, which is now dry, of course. We're gonna put this in a warm place for 30 minutes to an hour. You want it to look a little bit puffy, but it's not gonna be doubled in size at this point. But that's when we're gonna score it and put it into the cast iron. I do like to preheat my Dutch oven before I put this in, so I'll probably start that in about 15 minutes, but we'll see you back here in 30 minutes to an hour. All right, it's about an hour later now, and I am ready to bake my first loaf, which is the flour and water starter. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab another piece of parchment paper here. This is the scariest part for me, is flipping this out. Sometimes I land on the side. And there's probably more graceful ways to do it than that, but I'm just gonna gently pull this off of the little loaf. There we go. I did kind of land on the side, so we're just gonna scooch her over a little bit. Okay, we're fairly centered now, so I'm just gonna grab a little bit of flour. Case in point of how you don't have to be perfect at sourdough and it can still turn out, right? I'm just gonna sprinkle this over the top, and then we'll spread it. All right, and then I have this little scoring blade. It did actually come with the whole like stick. I prefer to just use the razor part because I can control it better. And there's definitely more artistic people for this part than I am, but I just usually do a really simple design. I'll just make little, almost like leaves, which is actually just little slits, and they don't even have to be perfect. I feel like once it's baked, all these designs are super forgiving and it just looks cute no matter what you do. Okay, and then we're ready to pop it into the Dutch oven. Now I've had my Dutch oven in the stove here for about half an hour at 450. So I'll turn the oven on, and that includes the preheat. I like if it's really nice and hot. Obviously you can get all kinds of different Dutch ovens. You can get some different cast iron ones. I actually used my Caraway Dutch oven, which does start to look kind of like this. It gets the brown edges, which is fine. I keep my other one nice like this for soups and things on top of the stove, but anything that you're gonna heat at such a high temperature in the oven will probably get some kind of stains and things on them. So I'm just gonna take this whole thing and set it inside. And then I kind of like to fold my wrinkles back so that it doesn't make dents in the bread as it bakes. Caraway is actually having a really good sale right now, I believe. I'll have them linked as always down below. But this little loaf is ready for the oven. So I'm gonna pop the lid on for the first 25 minutes, and then I'll take it off for the last 5 or so. That way you still get a bit of a crispy exterior, but not as like hard and crunchy as otherwise. So I'll pop the lid on and put it in the oven now for 25 minutes at 450 degrees. All right, and that is loaf number 1. Okay, the potato flake loaves are baked. I just baked these at 350 for 35 minutes. Obviously not covered at all. This is what it looks like now. So I'm gonna take these out of the pan. This one's probably gonna be hot, but the kids smell bread, so they are begging to eat it. But I wanna just show you the difference of each of these slices yet. So I'll probably cut the other one first. This one will probably be steaming, maybe falling apart a little bit because of that, but I want to show you the difference of the slice textures in both of these. Little hack, if you're cutting bread, I would highly recommend using an electric knife, especially for sourdough. Helps make really nice smooth cuts. And I like to tip this on its side to cut it, just to keep it from smushing as much. from coming out of the oven, but you can kind of see the difference here. This is the potato flake bread. It is super soft and fluffy, and then this is the flour and water starter with the artesian bread. So you can see the difference between the bread slices. I wish I could offer you a taste. This one is definitely a little bit more of a sour taste, traditional sourdough bread. This one you would never guess is sourdough. Let me know if you have any questions below or if anything was not explained well, but thank you for joining me today. I hope this was helpful, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, friends.